Frankfurt University, Germany. Professor Papa Teodoro is a worldwide expert on air transport and tourism economy. And today, as a subject that he will talk about is transportation and tourism, synergies and way forward. Professor Papa Teodoro, I thank you for being with us today. And I let you the floor for about 25 minutes. And after that, we will take questions and answers from Greece. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bonjour, for this very kind introduction, and welcome everyone. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here with you to discuss about a very important topic, at least in my opinion, which is the interaction between transport and tourism. We all know how important transport is for world's connectivity in terms of passengers. Also the role of transport in terms of cargo and the promotion and the globalization of trade. But what about tourism? Huh? Well, first of all, let's not forget that the demand for transport is of derived nature. Very few people get on an airplane for the sake of flying. Most people fly to go somewhere and do something. And this very activity, it's about tourism. So when we want to formally define tourism, it's essentially related to all activities that people undertake away from their area of usual environment or where they live for a period of more than one day and up to 1 year. So when we talk about tourism, and likewise when we talk about tourists, it's not only about leisure, it's also about business, it's about visiting friends and relatives, and so on. And it's very important to note that the two sectors have a kind of parallel patterns. Huh? So they're both very vulnerable to the external economic conditions, both at the place of origin and at the place of destination. They are also affected by political situations, by situations of hygiene, social situations, technology. There are also obviously lots of environmental issues to consider as well. And also both sectors are characterized by seasonality in many contexts. It's not only seasonality in terms of time, but it's also concentration in terms of space. So we have areas characterized by very thick traffic, what we call areas of core routes, whereas in other areas we only have peripheral traffic. And so that means areas that are underserved. So I would say it's very important to study the two sectors in parallel. In terms of statistics, we all know how devastating COVID-19 was for the transport world, when we lost about 60% of traffic, with particular emphasis on losses experienced by international traffic in 2020 and 2021. The market has sort of recovered ever since. So back in 2025, the IATA estimated that we had close to 5 billion segment passengers, 4.98. And unless we keep experiencing issues with the current geopolitical uncertainty, which is an issue I will cover in a while, in 2026 we will have slightly over 5.2 billion passengers. And again, load factors are quite important, about an 83% load factor. So we usually say that transport is very vulnerable, but the good news is that in the medium to longer term is also characterized by resilience. Resilience is a major keyword in the transport world, and I would say the same for tourism as well. So just to give you some numbers here, back in 2019 we had 1.5 billion international tourism arrivals. That went down to only 400 million in 2020. That was a massive decrease of 72% because of COVID-19, obviously. Since then, the market has recovered. By 2024, we had reached the levels achieved in 2020, 2019. When the figures for 2025 are going to be finalized, I'm sure that we will have exceeded the 1.5 billion achieved in 2019. And in terms of revenue, well, that's already well above levels achieved in 2019. So then we were talking about $1.7 trillion. In year 2024, it was two, and most probably in 2025, it was higher than that. So yes, as I said, vulnerability is one important aspect to consider. At the same time, when we talk about the medium to longer term, both sectors are characterized by strong resilience. Now, in terms of business, we keep saying, on many occasions that the airline sector is not that profitable. Usually, it has a ROIC of about 5-6%, and obviously during COVID-19, there were massive losses exceeding $130 billion. For the airport sector, is usually slightly better, and of course you have other stakeholders, including IT service providers like the GDSs or like freight forwarders that tend to perform better in terms of ROIC. Likewise, when we talk about tourism, there are areas where some sectors perform quite well, and beyond transport, we need to consider other areas of transport or tourism, like the cruise sector or the hotel sector. We also need to consider travel intermediaries. So both sectors are characterized by business volatility as well, but there are certain stakeholders within the wider ecosystem that also have healthy profit margins. Now, if we want to further analyze the relationship, first thing we need to do is to dig a bit further into the various sectors of transport. Usually we use the term tourism ratio. So tourism ratio refers to the turnover of a certain sector or subsector that may attribute it to tourism. And if this as a percentage is above 15%, then we typically refer to that sector as part of the tourism business ecosystem. So in this context, when we talk about commercial air transport, especially with respect to scheduled passenger traffic and also charter passenger traffic, I would say that the relationship is very strong. So tourism ratios are very high, typically exceeding 90%. Because remember, we're not only talking about leisure tourism, it's also business, it's visiting friends and relatives, and so on. If we talk about general aviation, in some cases, such as pleasure flying, again, tourism ratio is very high. Obviously, if you talk about aerial photography, for example, it is much lower. Regarding airports, again, passenger-related services or real estate services or other facilities like MICE, meetings, incentives, conferences, and exhibitions. So all these facilities offered by airports, again, they have a very strong tourism element inside, whereas in other cases, like, for example, utility recharges, obviously it's not that important. Air navigation, of course, it's more technical, so I would say that yes, it does have an indirect relationship to tourism, but not so much of a direct one. And same case with maintenance and overhaul. Now, with respect to regulation, again, I think that's quite interesting because aeropolitics have a structural interrelationship with tourism. First of all, remember that if you are to fly to a certain destination, you should have a right to fly. So this is part of the bilateral service agreements between different countries. We also have to consider potential capacity constraints. Issues with slot allocation, for example, at different airports, that can also be of importance. So I would say that some relationship between what we call aeropolitics and tourism again is quite strong. And finally, with respect to aviation training, yes, there is some indirect relationship, but not so much of a direct one. So if we are, as I said, to analyze the relationship in further detail, first of all, we have to dig into the specific sectors of air transport, and then we need to look at the different airline and airport business models. So typically, we say that low-fare airlines address people who tend to be more price conscious. Typically, people that fly for leisure tend to be more price conscious, so they might have a preference for low-fare airlines vis-a-vis traditional carriers. But having said that, over the last few years, we have experienced the whole phenomenon of hybridization, where full service network carriers get more into the area of low cost in terms of strategies and practices and vice versa. So I would say that both traditional legacy carriers and low cost carriers into business and leisure tourism, obviously with specifics to characteristics to consider in every case. Regarding leisure airlines, well, by definition, they are explicitly related to leisure tourism, and in many cases, leisure airlines are part of wider vertically integrated conglomerates like, TUI, which is a major tour operator, or Jet2.com. An interesting case is with regional airlines because, again, they can secure connectivity to remote regions and promote business and leisure tourism there. We also have all business class carriers that there are not that many around, but again, they predominantly care for business tourism. But having said that, very recently we saw the introduction of an all business leisure airline Beyond, and it's interesting to see how they will develop as well. Now, regarding general aviation, we said before, if it's related to pleasure flying, that's obviously directly related to tourism. In other areas, it would be predominantly for business transactions. And what about cargo? I mean, one might say that cargo is not related to tourism, but that's not true, because if, for example, you go to a nice Greek island, obviously you can taste the local cuisine, but you may wish to consume food that it's not produced locally. So this may have to be transported somehow. So we need to consider the role of cargo, not only in terms of the wider logistics, but also in terms of the tourism logistics. Likewise, in terms of the airports, we need to talk about the business model of the airport, whether it's commercially or non-commercially oriented. Typically, commercially oriented airports have a closer relationship to tourism because you need to build a specific narrative in terms of the destination, and you put more emphasis into offering various facilities to leisure and other passengers. So talking about the airline and airport business model is also important from a tourism point of view. Then we need to discuss about the different types of travel intermediaries. We have the so-called TDCs, the tourism distribution channels, where we need to assess the role of tour operators who put together the various elements of a holiday package and offer it at an inclusive price, either directly or through travel agents. So obviously, tour operators are directly related to leisure tourism. With respect to travel agents, both offline and online, like, for example, Booking.com Again, they have an explicit interest in both business and leisure tourism, whereas when we talk about business travel agencies and TMCs, which are the travel management companies, these are predominantly about business tourism. We obviously have the IT part related to GDSs, global distribution systems, meta search engines, fare aggregators, and all these ecosystem, which I would say is also related to tourism from the very sense that passengers need all these kind of services and all these IT intermediaries. They offer platforms that allow airlines to sell the tickets. And so, as we all know, we have direct and indirect sales channels. So first of all, as I said, we need to consider business models. We need to consider the role of travel intermediaries. And then, and I think that's also very, very important, we need to consider the destination level. Now, remember what I said in the very beginning, that people fly to go somewhere and do something. So destination
Mhm.
plays a very, very important role. So when we talk about destination, we need to consider the very attractions that are available at a certain destination. We need to consider the destination infrastructure, its revenue model, the quantity and the quality of visitors attracted by that destination. And obviously, from an air transport point of view, what matters is connectivity. And I think in order to promote tourism, we need to be aware of the wider systemic relationships effectively as captured by what we call route development. So I think that stakeholder management has become very, very important in transport, and we typically talk about how a transport should deal with various external stakeholders, including, for example, environmental stakeholders. Of course, we need to talk, for example, about CDM, which is collaborative decision making, which plays a very important role in airports. But what about destinations? Well, this is where route development plays a major role, and this is where airlines should come together with airports and regional destination authorities in order to jointly promote a tourism product. And there are obviously areas of conflict. So in some cases, airlines may ask either for direct or indirect subsidies in order to start flying or keep flying to certain destinations. Same case with airports. So what would be revenue from an airline point of view? It would be a cost from a regional tourism authority point of view. So that's obviously a typical supply chain conflict. At the same time, there are areas of synergies, because they both have, it's to the best of their interest to promote destination and make money from different aspects. So typically, when we do route development, we need to identify the different stakeholders, the different relations that exist among the different stakeholders. So typically, from a theoretical point of view, we can make use of the salience theory, where we talk about the role of power, legitimacy, and urgency. Then we need to identify the different areas of synergies and conflict. We should start with synergies in order to build trust, and then deal with conflict in order to resolve the problem. And coming to the end of my this kind of rather long introduction, I would say that all this is of great importance in the current environment. I mean, when things are going well, it's easier for stakeholders to work together. But what about in areas characterized by strong uncertainty, both economic and geopolitical uncertainty, as is currently the case? And so what we've seen over the last month is a major rise of fuel prices, also a closure of a good part of the Middle Eastern airspace, which follows the closure of the Russian airspace for European carriers and of EU space for Russian carriers. So in essence, this means more expensive trips and in most cases longer trips. So if you want, I mean, even before the current war with Iran, if you wanted to fly, let's say from Tokyo to Frankfurt, I did that a couple of years ago. Russian sanctions were already there, and instead of flying westbound, we flew eastbound. So from Tokyo, we went up to the Bering Straits, then up to the North Pole, Svalbard, Norway, and Frankfurt. Extra time about 3.5 hours, which at that time was obviously quite inconvenient and cost the carrier quite some extra money. But if you consider what happens now with fuel prices and Jet A1 fuel over $180, then obviously the combination can become quite toxic. So longer flights and high fuel prices means that a number of airlines may face major problems. Now, again, we need to consider whether this is symmetric or asymmetric. So before the Iranian war, obviously EU carriers flying to Far East, they did experience problems, but that was not the case with Middle Eastern carriers or other carriers that did not have to observe sanctions regarding Russia. And fuel prices were kept, let's say, at reasonable levels. Again, here we see that the big carriers of the Middle East, like Emirates, Etihad, Qatar Airways, or even Gulf Air, they do face severe issues now because of airspace closures. So typical Sixth Freedom Middle Eastern carriers, they're in trouble. That might positively affect perhaps European carriers that fly eastbound direct. But in any case, it's also important to consider the role of destinations. So Dubai, for example, which is a great example of how a city was built thanks to connectivity. I mean,
Yeah.
back in 1985, when Emirates was established, there was not much to do in Dubai. Dubai was in a kind of middle of nowhere, but instead of focusing on the nowhere, people had the vision to focus on the middle. They developed an airline that capitalized on the locational advantage of the UAE and Dubai in particular. And then, because of advanced connectivity, Dubai managed to become a central place, and with all the new attractions built there, to be a proper tourist destination, both for what we call a winter sun product. So Europeans visiting Dubai during winter time or springtime, but also a major business center. Now we see that many of these Middle Eastern destinations they do face severe issues because of the Iranian war. That might also affect a number of popular resorts, let's say in the Red Sea, like Hurghada or Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Of course, there are big issues with resorts in Israel, like Eilat, or even in the Mediterranean Sea. And the problem is how further this may expand geographically wise. So whether it's going to affect Turkey, whether it's going to affect Greece, other countries in the Mediterranean. Again, it's too early to say what is going to happen. We're in a state of flux. Everything is quite uncertain, and it's also a matter of what we call cognitive distance. So for the American tourists who are very far away, maybe the entire Eastern Mediterranean region, as well as the Middle East, they may be perceived as relatively risky areas. For Europeans who have a much better idea of geography, of local geography, it might be different. Again, as I said, we have a big effect as a result of rise of fuel prices, but other than that, many of the effects are going to be of asymmetric nature, both in terms of airlines and destinations, and it's a matter to see how things will evolve. Unfortunately, as I said, we're in a state of flux. We don't know how long this is going to last for, so it's quite difficult to make any solid conclusions at present. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Maybe I would like to get back to one point you mentioned. You talk about Dubai, and I was thinking about Emirates, but also Qatar Airways. Thinking about Emirates, Dubai city has been developed. The city has a airline connectivity with more than 250 planes, including the Airbus A380. And how can we respond to the growth of the aviation demand in terms of market? And when we talk about respond, it means having enough planes, having a good network, and this is a big investment, as Emirates did, and at the same time being protected by this kind of vulnerability, because all the airlines are stocked down. And I was in 2 weeks ago, I was in Delhi, and there were a few of my colleagues who were flying from Delhi to Dubai and everywhere else, connecting to Dubai, and they were stuck at Delhi. How could we, at the same time, have a business model built to respond to the growth of the demand at the best prices, and at the same time having a sustainable business in terms of economy?
Thank you very much. That's a very valid question. And first of all, we need to approach this from a network perspective. I mean, when the A380 came into operation, the very idea was that the world would be structured around major hubs and around major airlines focusing on hub and spoke services. Typically, that was the case of Emirates. I think that's why they were one of the launching customers of the A380. Since then, of course, we've seen major changes in technology, and we now have aircraft that can fly longer, especially short-haul aircraft, including the extended or ultra-extended range versions of the A321 and so on. And especially talking about India, it's very interesting to see the meteoric rise of Indigo, also for India, and how many aircraft they have ordered over the last couple of years, and how they're planning to fly direct to Europe and elsewhere, essentially bypassing the Gulf. So talking about vulnerability, obviously, what is very, very important is to be able, first of all, to rely on your own resources. So during COVID-19, as we know, the American carriers did not suffer as much as others. Why? Because the domestic US market is huge, and not that many restrictions were imposed on the US domestic market. On the other hand, Singapore Airlines had very big issues because it's predominantly a sixth freedom carrier, and there is no local traffic. And so, first of all, it's easier to survive if you're big and you can rely on your domestic market. Second, to rely on the O&D, on traffic that comes directly to you for either business and leisure, and then on hub and spoke network. And so obviously, sixth freedom traffic is very, very important. But I think what COVID has shown us, and what the current crisis also shows us, is that we should never put all our eggs into one basket, and try to diversify our strategy as much as possible.
Thank you, Professor. So the floor is open for, and I think several.
So first of all, thanks a lot, Andreas. I must say to the audience that we are very proud to have a very nice partnership between University of the Aegean and yourself, Andreas, and ENAC and ENAC about Air Transport University, UTA. We look forward to organize one year a module in Grace, a module of the training cycle of UTA. So my question is this one about defending aviation and sustainability. Is it meaning in the same time to defend sustainable tourism? You know that both are very criticized about the pollution, etc. And in fact, are we in a new context where we can suppose a sort of alliance between the two sectors of this topic? What do you think about that?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Francis. I think that's a very, very important question. Typically, when we talk about sustainability, there are all three pillars to consider: the economic, the social, and the environmental. I think we've talked about the economy. Also, from a societal point of view, transport is very important because it connects people. We saw, the opposite during COVID-19, and also tourism is very important from a social point of view in terms of building communities characterized by tolerance and open-mindedness. Obviously, the big issue is about the environment, and over the last 20-25 years, we saw a number of environmental activists who are quite critical against air transport. Um, I think it's very important to acknowledge that the sector has taken a lot of measures in order to reduce its environmental footprint at different levels, not only in terms of CO2, but also in terms of noise, in terms of fuel consumption, and so on. At a destination level, that's also very, very important because we should ensure that destinations do not become victims of their own success. With low-cost carriers and the low fares, it became very easy for people to fly around and visit a number of different destinations. This is part of what we call democratization of tourism, which is very important. At the same time, if you end up having mismatch between tourist demand and supply, meaning the carrying capacity, the capacity of a destination to manage the number of tourists that arrive, then obviously that's not good. I'm sure you are all familiar with the term over-tourism, which is not an absolute term. It's a relative term and shows the mismatch between demand and supply. And this is an extra reason why we should put more emphasis in the development of what we call DDMMOs, which are the destination development, management, and marketing organizations. They should be around to coordinate the different stakeholders and make sure that people do arrive at the destination and they have a good time. Now, another thing that I would like also to mention, and that's, I think, very, very important, is what we call carbon leakage. Over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen the European Commission having, I would say, a stricter attitude vis-à-vis airlines. It all started with the EU ETS. Then, as we all know, we have CORSIA at an international level, but the EU has gone further with new restrictions regarding the use of sustainable aviation fuels, the use of anti-tankering legislation, things related to kerosene tax, and so on. So, in principle, I think we all agree that protecting the environment and mitigating the effects of climate change is important. However, we have to ensure that all these environmental measures do not distort the level playing field. And so what I mean here is that if, for example, it becomes much more expensive to fly from, let's say, Paris to Athens than from Paris to Istanbul, just because the Paris-Istanbul route does not have to incur a number of costs that are incurred only by intra-European flights, then that means that a number of destinations may be put into a disadvantage. So, for example, you may have people that want to spend their holidays from France or Germany or Scandinavian country to Rhodos, and other that might think to go to Antalya, which is not that far away. But given that Antalya is in Turkey, which is outside the EU, they're not bound by all these restrictions. So the end is that instead of protecting the environment at a global level, all you end up doing is switching tourism flows away from the EU and towards places outside the EU. And that's the equivalent of carbon leakage in the context of tourism. And that's something that we should be very careful for, because a number of Mediterranean countries, European Mediterranean countries, rely very, very heavily on transports. About 78% of inbound tourism in Greece is by air. So if all restrictions are applied, I mean, environmental restrictions and extra charges, that might have a devastating effect on our tourism sector. So I think that sustainability is top priority, but we should ensure that the playing field is not distorted, and that we have some healthy competition around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other question from the floor?
No question?
Yeah, or maybe one, because you talked about vulnerability for both sectors, and we see that indeed yes, it's becoming quite chaotic with more and more, or more often, crisis. So question could be how both sectors can work on their resilience for the coming period, and do we have a good practice on this specific topic of resilience for such impacted businesses or sectors?
Thank you very much for this question. I think we can learn some lessons from COVID-19, because in the very beginning, everything was quite chaotic, and every country was just following its own policy without consulting each other. Eventually, at least within the EU, we managed to reach some common ground, and I think that did help the sector. Obviously, there were, as I said, heavy losses, but at least a certain policy was developed regarding subsidies, regarding loans that had to be returned to the state, and so on. So, in typical business, you would expect reliance to be based on, let's say, the ability of a sector to sustain itself in difficult times. Problem with the airline sector in particular is that profit margins are very low, are very thin, and the airlines have only now managed to somehow recover from COVID-19. I'm not suggesting, that we should always bail out the private sector, but at least maybe there are some lessons to be learned from the COVID period. Maybe the governments may decide to offer some tax credits to the airlines. Maybe, for example, within the EU, we may have a temporary freeze of all these extra environmental restrictions that add to the cost of the airlines. And after all, we should not forget that they are not the airlines to blame for the current situation. They are the victims of the geopolitical tension. They are the actual recipients of the rise of fuel prices and so on. So what I'm saying here is that yes, we should have a solid way to introduce as a contingency plan. And again, we should be at a pan-European level in order to address any possible distortion of competition.
Okay. Um, I have a question for you, Professor. Uh, how could we, or do you have the idea of how could we develop tourism in islands which are difficult to reach in terms of air transportation cost? I was thinking about, I was thinking of the French islands of Polynesia, and I realized that at the moment, uh, it's more than 205 or 3,000 euros round trip from Paris. And it's quite expensive actually from Tokyo or Singapore to go to Polynesia. And at the same time, these islands rely for their economy, rely on tourism. How could we, uh, how could we, find solutions to make these destinations affordable? And this is a question because they rely on tourism, and the cost of the transportation is quite expensive.
Thank you very much again. This is quite prevalent in my country, in Greece, from a different point of view, because we have well-known islands like Crete, Rhodos, Kos, Mykonos, and Santorini, but many other islands which are not that well known and which are also interested in developing tourism. Now, within the EU context, and I will talk about Polynesia later on, I think we can also make use of the PSO mechanism. So the PSO are the public service obligation routes. Typically, these routes are used in the EU to offer connectivity to places where there is no commercial interest from airlines to fly in and out. But in my opinion, we should step beyond this mentality, which allow me sometimes is close to what we call misery management, and see how we can potentially use a PSO as an appetizer. So the PSO can establish connectivity to a certain place for a certain period of time, and if we can combine the connectivity assured by a PSO with an integrated marketing plan, then people can become aware of that particular destination. And if things go and are successful, then the destination will be able to support itself from a connectivity point of view without a PSO. So first of all, and in terms of remote regions within the EU, I believe that a more proactive use of PSOs can help. Interestingly, about 15 years ago, the International Civil Aviation Organization came together with the UNWTO, which is the United Nations World Tourism Organization, and they produced a report on what they call ESTDR, which are the Essential Services Tourism Development Routes. Essential Services is the equivalent of PSOs in North America. And there they also explain how we can combine the two. Now, that's within the EU where distances are not that long. Obviously, if we consider a French Polynesia, it's a totally different story because it's very far away from France and from Europe as well. But I think in that case, it would be predominantly a matter of building a narrative to attract tourism from Australia, to attract tourism from New Zealand, or even from Latin America. So obviously we need to be aware of the physical geography, from an origin point of view, both Australia and New Zealand, they have a great market potential. They typically prefer to go to places like Fiji or Bali in Indonesia, but why not Tahiti or the French Polynesia in general? So It's a matter of how you build a narrative at a local level and how you liaise this narrative with new potential areas of origin. And that's why I mentioned Australia and New Zealand, which are far closer, therefore the trip of the cost would be smaller anyway. Apart from that, yes, we can attract Europe, but just because the airfare is going to be very expensive anyway, we should primarily focus on people who are not that price conscious. So for people who can afford to pay an expensive fare, provided, of course, that they can be offered a five-star quality of service while being at the destination. And this brings us closer to what I said earlier, that the travel narrative should be consistent with the local destination narrative in terms of quality of service provided.
We have a question from Marie Giorganti.
Okay, so what should be the main priorities for aviation and tourism sector to better prepared for future global challenges? So thank you, Mary. Mary is also a student of ours from the University of the Aegean. As I said, in medium term, we need to address the geopolitical challenges, building resilience and having a better coordination with governments. In the medium to longer term, we need to address the environmental issues, but it's, I would say, predominantly a matter of mentality, how we can bring the different stakeholders together. I mean, it sounds obvious, but unfortunately, I don't think that the stakeholders talk to each other as much as they should. Gradually, they do, but there's still a long way forward, and I think this needs to be done at different levels. Now, as I said, there are a number of supply chain conflicts to consider. So we typically talk about the love and hate relationship between airlines and airports. Airlines may have issues with ANSPs. Destinations may want tourism, but they may not be prepared to keep, let's say, their hotels open off season, and then airlines may start complaining that we cannot bring people to a destination if there's nothing to do there in winter. But you know, playing the blame game doesn't make any sense. It always discourages people from flying. That's why I keep saying it's important to bring the different stakeholders together. And from an air transport and tourism point of view, the local destination authority may perhaps play this role of coordinator.
Okay. Regarding the specificity of the country with many Iceland, you said about it. How is rapidly, because we have the time is ending. How is the public-private organization of tourism in Greece?
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of the tourism sector, we see that the private sector is very active in terms of hospitality development, and over the last decades, we've seen that the private sector became very heavily involved in building new hotels, and especially over the last few years, greater emphasis has been put on upgrading the quality of hotels. So now we have, I would say, more and better five-star hotels compared to what was the case in the past. At the same time, Francis, it's very important to focus on what we call integrated quality management. And so even if you have fantastic transport and great hotels, if the local surface transport infrastructure is problematic, or if you have problems with other service providers, this is an issue. So again, it's a matter of how everybody encapsulates the importance of quality management, from the taxi driver that will take you from the airport to the local restaurateur and so on. So yes, the private sector can play a major role. Yes, the private sector should be guaranteed a stable business environment by the government in terms of taxation, in terms of policy making, and again, the government should be proactive. The good thing in Greece is that in the last few years we also saw a major institutional reform in terms of civil aviation. So finally, a few years ago, we experienced the breakup of the old CAA. So now we have the new Hellenic Civil Aviation Authority, which is the National Covenant Authority and the proper regulator of the market. And we have HASP, which is the Hellenic Aviation Service Provider, which is in charge of managing a number of airports and air navigation. So that was a major institutional reform. We also saw that Athens International Airport developed as an exemplary partnership between the public and the private sector. Also, we saw that Fraport Greece, which had been granted a 40-year concession by the government to operate 14 regional airports in Greece. They're doing quite well, and we're also about to see the opening of the new airport in Heraklion in Crete. So, unlike most places in Europe where airport developments are brownfield, meaning they rely on existing infrastructure, upgrading the existing infrastructure. That was the case in Greece with Fraport Greece, but Athens International Airport, new airport in Castelli, were greenfield developments of major strategic importance for tourism. And I think that there is a vision to move further with the other airports that are currently in need of renovation in Greece, and obviously with modernizing the infrastructure of the navigation service provider.
Thank you very much. That's why your master is very important.
Yeah, I have two very small, if there is no question from the floor, if there is no, I have two short questions. The first one is, how do you explain that the tourism industry in our economy doesn't have the right place in the government concern or policies and compared to other sectors? And the fact is, tourism brings jobs, and you cannot delocalize these jobs and so on. And my second question is, what could we improve in terms of aviation industry in Europe in order to follow the growth of the industry or the demand in the tourism industry in Europe? How could we improve this sector by using our transportation system?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think both questions are very important. Regarding the first one, I would say that it's predominantly a matter of lobbying. So, for example, we can see that in Europe, and although the primary sector, the agricultural sector, is not as important as it used to be in the 1950s, we have two agricultural funds and another one related to fisheries. We have none related to tourism. Having said that, the good thing with tourism is it's a kind of passe-partout. Huh? So you can get funding from different areas, which means that being flexible is very important, and being good in communication is also very important. I mean, in Greece, tourism accounts for over 20% of the GDP. So over the last few years, it has gained a central role in government. In other European countries, that might not be the case, but I think that it increasingly plays a role. So lobbying for better, let's say, promotion of tourism should be undertaken at different levels. And regarding your second question, again, it's very important not to suffer from mismatches. I mean, problem that we have in European transport, and in some cases in European tourism as well, is a kind of a mismatch between demand and supply, because in Europe, I think that we have become a bit phobic in terms of new infrastructure sometimes. And as you know, there is a big issue with competitiveness in Europe, and you can't really raise your competitiveness unless you get some brave decisions in regarding infrastructure as well. I mean, look at the UK. It took them more than 50 years to decide to have a new runway in the southeast of England. And 10 years ago, I was a dean at the University of West London. It was a time that the government announced the building of the third runway at Heathrow Airport. We're in 2026, and that hasn't happened yet. And that's the UK, which, okay, now it's outside the EU, but even within the EU, we're very, very slow in terms of taking decisions regarding airport infrastructure. Single European sky, I think it could have worked much better than what is actually the case. So in terms of raising our competitiveness as a union, in terms of making sure that air transport and tourism have a future that they deserve, I think we need to take more brave and radical decisions in terms of infrastructure building.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your answer and also an advice, because you just mentioned that we need to be brave in order to take radical decision. You're right saying that we decide to do something to build up an airport, and you have a lot of activists, refraining from any, and at the end of the day, we spend money, we spend time, we spend energy, and we don't move forward. Thank you for this piece of advice. Francis, would you like to say something in conclusions? A few.
Well, thank you again, Andreas. You were the third intervenant, the third speaker of Aviation News. More and more, we are going to open to all the world this kind of webinar with the great help of Jean-Claude, to make new TEA, but also to make more close people of the aviation in the world. And we speak about aviation news at ICAO next week. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I wish you an excellent weekend. And we look forward to see you again next month at about the same date. We'll have a new speaker. Thank you very much, and see you again. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.